I'm going to tell you about the following topic, really, making motor incident information accessible. And in summary, I'll tell you who is Redtail Telematics. I'll then talk about data requirements for good information, incident capture, and then a little diversion into actually, how quick is a crash, then incident presentation methods and conclusions. So, where has Redtail come from? We've been trading 4 years now, formed in 2010. We have offices in Cambridge, UK and San Diego. We're a sister company of Plex Technology, which is a technology design house. So although Redtail is relatively new, it's very closely associated with a very experienced design house. Plextech's Europe's largest private communications technology design house, and we've been supplier to Tracker Network, now Lysander since 1993, and suppliers to Logix since 1998. So we've got some track record in designing devices to go in the automotive environment. And in that time, we delivered over 5 million SVR and tracking devices into the automotive aftermarket, and there's over 7 million devices to our design actually out there. At present, we're supplying device, airtime and data to fleet insurance customers in the UK, Europe and US, Canada, Mexico and Malaysia and Pakistan. So, working on our global ambitions. Some of the sort of background technologies that Plextech have include designing systems for Formula One racing, the Pneumacare contactless lung measurement system. So this is the technology to actually measure lung performance without actually contact with the patient, and it's pushing the frontiers of diagnostic capability. Another example of medical work was a cardiac patient monitoring unit, which had to do 5 probe ECG of 250 samples per heartbeat, and over 200 patients in the same ward area, so quite a dense data requirement. So dense data is what we're at. We presently have a subsidiary that's working in streetlight control, winning 50% of the UK tenders, and just won a major US contract based on our ultra-narrowband telemetry system, and we're just in the process of pushing that into the whole Internet of Things space. So what's that space for that? Also an electronic scanning radar system that's now deployed in 12 countries, and we have won 2 Queen's Awards, one for export achievement and one for continuous innovation. Anyway, that's over. So Redtail's offering is devices in cars, airtime relationships, data warehousing and device management, and then feeding, for this market, we're feeding raw data to insurers who want raw data and process data to those insurers who want processed data. What are the data requirements? Signal quality, signal sources, adequate data rate. What are the dimensions of acceleration and data quality themselves? So if we look at quality of GPS, the GPS statically can appear to be quite good, but what's interesting is when you actually look at it dynamically as it's going around corners. And quality of the GPS engine, quality of the position of the solution in the vehicle can actually make quite a big difference to the apparent tracking of GPS to the road itself. And you can get some quite big errors just because the quality of the GPS engine or the location of the device or the combination of those two effects. So signal quality and sources are pretty important. Sensor quality, so obviously this is an argument you'll have heard played many times in this environment, but from our point of view, we see that the black box or dongle can provide the best data, and also, of course, a professional fit enables early sight of the vehicle and the go faster stripes and alloys that have been fitted but not quite declared on the policy. And it's best also if the device is out of sight and out of mind, beyond easy tamper range. It doesn't actually conflict with the driver, of course. Unlikely to be removed accidentally, and will not fail to be switched on for wild rides. Sorry, did I mention that? And also unlikely to become dropped or airborne during an impact. Obviously, phone-based devices can suffer many of those problems, either with vibration or coming loose. It's very hard to get really regular sampling, very hard to get really good GPS signal quality. Battery drain can be an issue, and failure to activate is obviously a major issue. So why such a sensitive GPS design? What's interesting is that the GPS signals aren't strong in the first place. They have to get through the window, which in some vehicles can be quite attenuating. The GPS band is quite close to the microwave oven band. And this thing looks like a lump of meat, really. And if the device is fitted out of sight and out of mind, it may be that the GPS signal has to pass through that attenuator, and there's not much of it left necessarily by the time it gets to the device. So it's important that the GPS entire system solution, including the box, which is part of the component, is really sensitive, and that's one of the things that we've really worked on trying to do to get a really good GPS signal. So another important aspect is how much data resolution do you need? A lot of the industry is working with 1 Hz GPS data and regarding that as perfectly adequate, but other parts want higher resolution than that, in particular 10 Hz granularity from accelerometers. Let's just examine the difference. So that's somebody accelerating using just 1 Hz accelerometry from GPS. But if you look closer using real accelerometers, you can actually see there's a lot more detail available. You can actually see the gear changes going on, which you cannot see on GPS alone. And this is another example of as a journey of a car accelerating. This is 1 Hz GPS data, and it looks as though it's at a constant speed. But if you use the accelerometers 10 times a second, you can actually see he was accelerating, and this is going to blow up here, accelerating and decelerating wildly. In fact, he was tailgating. We know that because he was instructed to. But that, it completely does not come through the GPS signal. And so actually looking at high impact detection, which is what really gives us the clue to some incident having happened, what are the conditions? This is a typical crash buffer where you've got samples being taken, held in memory, and there's some event has happened here, and obviously that triggers memory in the device, which is then keeps the data and sends it up to the back end. That was a 10 mile an hour impact. How long did it take? If you watch it in slow motion, you can see there's a roughly 10 centimetre compression on both vehicles. So how long did that take? If we actually do the sums, also what's the effect of low speed impacts? It's recognised by the industry that in the region 7 to 15 miles an hour, these tend not to distort the crumple zone of the vehicle. The whole impact is taken by the bumper, which is compressible. That means that the vehicle is decelerated in a short distance. That 7 to 15 miles an hour is taken out in a very short distance. That means that the acceleration is high. And that actually, that speed range is reckoned to be the most serious for whiplash. The head and neck effectively form a pendulum, and it's the soft tissues in the neck that get affected. And that pendulum tends to magnify the impulse, so you get higher g-forces on the head than were necessarily projected to the body itself. Interestingly, women are more susceptible than men to the accident itself, and different cars behave differently and result in different propensity to whiplash. So, again, back to how quick was that accident? So 10 miles an hour is just over 4 meters per second. And if you're doing 4 meters per second, you travel that 10 centimeters of compression in just 22 milliseconds. All the big stuff was done in 22 milliseconds. And in order to catch any detail, you've got to be observing that quite frequently. And the resultant deceleration is in the range 10 to 20 G momentarily. That was a 30 mile an hour impact. Let's look in slow motion. I'll play that once again to give you more time to absorb the information. This is the same accident looked at from 2 different angles. Watch the clock. the car is completely stopped by 100 milliseconds and is going backwards. So all the big damage is done in 1/10 of a second at a 30 miles an hour impact. The crumple zone does operate at this speed. The chair-back brakes, deceleration loads spread over a greater distance, or there's more of them. And interestingly, there's a lower propensity to whiplash. Again, the sample rate requirements is not dissimilar because the accident is spread over a longer distance. Actually, the time is not dissimilar in terms of where the most of the energy is absorbed. But G is higher, up at 40 or 50. It's still saying you need to sample quite fast. This is a professional recording made in a professional crash laboratory, and this is typical of what you will see. So peak G at 50, minus 50, so it's saying it's slowing down. This is 1/10 of a second. It's a very close tie-up with that film. This was a different recording to the one seen in the film, but the result very similar. So serious amounts of energy over that last part of the 1/10 of a second. Now that was taken at 20,000 samples a second. Let's have a look close up. Looking close up, that in order to catch that peak accurately, well, those are 1 millisecond ticks. And it's our belief that really to get the detail of that, you've got to be watching every 1 millisecond or so. If you are at significantly less than that, you're quite likely to miss some of the detail. There's a lot of false alerts in this game, as you'll probably know. And what are the sources? Large single impacts, and you really need to identify the impact direction to be able to weed out the false alarms. Was it an accident or was it a pothole? And there can be exaggerated effects if the installation is poor. If the device is, particularly the plug-in devices, that the socket can actually be prone to wobble, and that can apparently amplify the effect. The parcel shelf will wobble. If it's attached to a loose wiring, then also that will lead to some errors. So this is a poorly installed device. So apparently it's showing a peak acceleration of 150 G, but that wasn't what actually happened. It was probably more like 50 G, but the oscillation of the thing it was attached to, if we look at that expanded, it's the thing it's attached to which is apparently oscillating a lot. It's being like a tuning fork. So it's creating a factor of 3 error in how large you thought the accident was. And you've got to do quite serious signal processing to avoid that. And again, you can see the average line through here is no different from the previous accident recording, though it looks as though it's peaking at more than 100 G. Important to actually keep vibration out of play. Importance of accurate orientation. Significant impacts arise all the time in normal driving. Potholes, curb climbing, speed humps, road transitions, all completely valid. They're not accidents. Accident-related impacts do tend to arise in the horizontal plane. Not completely, because bumpers don't align, so there can be a vertical component, but there tends to be a stronger horizontal component. So using oriented data, you're better off. Aftermarket devices are rarely perfectly oriented, so it's necessary to actually remotely reorient the data. So this is an example of oriented data. So the z-axis is showing nearly normal value of G in its direction. X and Y are aligned, but this is loosely installed. So there's a lot of noise on this data. This is fairly well installed from a noise point of view, but it's not oriented. So X and Y are not aligned around 0. In fact, there's 0. It's slightly upside down and on its side. That's what it should look like. So it gets quiet when it is genuinely quiet, and X and Y are coordinated. So if we now think about trying to reconstruct what actually happened, using the data to reconstruct and make it available to those who would like to know. So GPS data arrives unfiltered. It has to be filtered. accelerometer data needs to be reoriented and processed. More is better. We think 1 kilohertz crash sampling is a standard that's worth the industry tending towards. Not everybody agrees on that. Additional sources are also beneficial. A gyro to actually pick up rotational acceleration. Just linear acceleration won't give you the fact that the car has been tilted or starting to spin. Reconstruction is still prone to other errors. Mapping. I'll show you some massive mapping errors in just a moment. And uncontrolled data fusing. I'll talk about that more in a minute as well. And presenting the data need to suit different audiences. The expert audience can understand all sorts of detail, but claims room staff are not necessarily have a sort of engineering or scientific background, and they find it harder to read some types of data. So we've been working on some presentation methods to try and make the data accessible to those without a scientific or engineering background. We've borrowed this scoring method actually from the Met Office. And it's the concept of a crash severity and how sure we were that it actually is a correct value. So that's how severe the accident we think was, and that is really saying, well, if it's only 25%, that means the nature of the data means we're not quite sure that how severe it really was. There was a wide spread of uncertainty on that, whereas if it was showing up there, we'd be very sure. And also we're showing where the energy seemed to come from and the magnitude of it. This is actually demonstrating a sort of graphical representation of the energy. Let me just play this again. You saw some vectors of energy come out the front. Let me just play that once again. Watch carefully. There you go. So there was some acceleration forwards. What was that? And on this scale, that was less than 5G, so it wasn't huge. But how did that rate in our system? Well, we rated that at about a 30, but a very high confidence that it was about 30. And it looked like, to us, the energy came from this area of the vehicle. This is a real accident. It actually happened to our CTO. And what happened was he was stopped at a roundabout and hit up the back by another driver. Now, we rated it as a vehicle damage possible, personal injury unlikely. What actually happened? Well, there was about £2,000, say €3,000 worth of damage to the back of the car, and the driver hit his head on the A-pillar. He was off work for 2 days, but didn't go to hospital. So we think that's pretty fair. Personal injury unlikely, and some damage to the vehicle. By the way, the claims people wouldn't let him go. They were ringing him every day. You want to make a claim? You want to make a claim for weeks, and he got very, very cross with that process. And so now we present for our insurance customers this entire sort of scene. This is the first form when we dreamt it up. So a concept of a search window where you can search for different accidents in the database, pulling up the location of where the accident was. So this is a Google Earth, so you can have a look around, see what kind of location it was immediately in real time, where we think the vehicle was hit. So this is Tony's actual accident as it appears on our system. 30% with high confidence. That on the system would actually play, and also just a map representation of where it's happened. Also sort of the IMI of the vehicle and some details and reverse geocoding, and basically a whole picture of what we think just happened. And this is how our insurance customers can actually see what's going on now. It's kind of a wallboard of what's happening today in their system, and with a list of severities and the order to list by severity, because that's generally what keeps people excited. And as you delve down, you find different windows. So here's a particular incident. There's an accident on this street. We've got, again, the incident details, the time, and the fact that it looked like it was some kind of rear end and coming from underneath. So perhaps there was an impact coming from that particularly. Maybe it was a bumper went under this bumper. Let's look at some real incidents as shown. So here, although severity, we need to adjust this algorithm a bit. I mentioned mapping errors. This is where Plextex and Redtail's headquarters is, just there. On GPS, it shows us there, because the maps are wrong. There are huge mapping errors. And it's going to be some time, I think, before all the maps are corrected. We've had accidents show up as being on the road, when in fact the car was in the ditch. So if we move on from that, what did it show? It showed that the impact was from underneath, and this is actually a graphical display showing the purity of how that impact was from underneath, and we can look at what happened before and afterwards. It was a speed hump. Actually, it's a speed hump on the entrance to the factory. So, but you know, he went over it a bit fast, and actually was showing quite considerable G. I think that's peaking at 5G. So he went over the speed hump too fast. But that's a 5G accident. Somebody's saying that's an accident. Well, it wasn't. He just went over the speed hump too fast. Let's look at a different one. So now we're showing G. We're also showing speed. So this is showing that a vehicle went, and that speed is 45 miles an hour or so on that part of the graph. Now, I know the writing's a bit small, but we're showing some pretty big bangs here. What's going on? Let's expand on that. Also, it's showing it's coming from underneath. So if you're in this system, if you actually get close up, it'll now start giving you some greater detail. We can see exactly in time when it happened and what was going on. And if you expand still further, you can see in huge zoomed up detail what actually was going on. And now here's a different example, another real accident. Happened pretty quick, didn't it? You've got to feel some sympathy for that. Now it happened, it just was complete coincidence. It was one of our guys and he had a camera fitted in his car. Let's look out the back window. I don't know if any of you understand Polish, but I think that was a bad word in Polish. So let's see what our system made of all that. It's joining the M25 going east from the A1. It was between 25 and 50 severity. We were very sure of it. So again, real crash possible, personal injury unlikely. And in fact, there was a hospital visit, but nobody was actually kept in. Now let's look at the impacts. There were 3 impacts. There was a first impact, then the second car went into the back, and then another car went into the back of the second car. And you can see this as clear as day. And this information is up seconds after the impact. So the insurer can see this seconds after the impact. And now, this isn't live, so I can't actually wheel through it, but I've got a sequence of images that show you how the insurer can look. So he's got a marker here, and you can actually step through the different aspects. And at each point, he can see where the energy appeared to hit the vehicle from. So the first one, that's the first impact into the front. That's saying you hit the vehicle in front. The second one is saying you got hit from behind. Then you hit the vehicle in front again. And this is momentary. This is within fractions of a second. And then when the car behind got hit from behind, he hit you again. And you hit the guy in front again. All available today. Now this is a different one. Imagine you're played this. Oh, sorry, this is that accident shown up in the vectogram. Let me go back one. So Again, you can imagine different classifications of staff being handed this and being able to interpret the data differently. So the data is offered up in different forms because people read data with different abilities in different ways, and a different quality of staff will be handed, this job will be handed to from point to point. So looking at the vectogram again, so watch, it hits the front in front, hits from behind, hits again. Now this is a reconstruction that we've done purely from the box data. There was no camera at this incident. So we've just taken the telematic data and trying to create a visualization, because you know the average claims guy is going to find that a bit of a squiggly mess. But if we can turn it into that kind of video representation, we think it's quite useful. And that's entirely synthetic. There was no camera present. And this is what the vectogram looked like. The start of a bad day. That was 10 seconds of his life he doesn't really want to have to go through again. Now, this was an interesting one. This is a real accident where we were actually asked to look and describe what we think happened versus the claim actually being submitted, the words of the claim. So we reconstructed this video. This is the first one we did. And then we were shown the words. And the words were, I was driving along at night. Well, obviously that's a daytime thing because it's synthetic. A deer ran out, I swerved to avoid it and rolled my car. And the insurer wanted to see, well, what does the information say? Does it match with those words? And I think that's a pretty good representation. So it went through as a valid claim. So, conclusions. Claims room is the last department to benefit from telematics historically, but I think by no means the least. Typical claims room staff need well and simply presented information. The data quality has to be high. Sensors, signals, good mounting. The data rate must be adequate. Driver behaviour needs ideally to be 10 Hz data. Crash data needs ideally to be 1 kHz data. And the number of presentation methods need to be offered in parallel to assist interpretation.